Chapter 51. Prince of Harpies. Race, Jenny and Anita casually crossed the marble-esque floor back to the room where they had encountered Klemper. Race could almost feel a wave of satisfaction emanating from the statues of the gods. "We could use the gold in these doors," Jenny remarked. "I'll have my husband send some people down to fetch them." "That might be considered desecration," Anita warned. "It's not a good idea to upset the gods," Race agreed. "I guess not," Jenny remarked wistfully. They closed the huge golden doors behind them and continued on to the guard station where they had had their first encounter with some of Klemper's Harpies. These first few rooms were lit, making their progress relatively easy. They chatted together as they travelled, mainly discussing the events that had just taken place. "Anita was right," Jenny commented. "That Libna was too good to be true. I now wonder if it might have been she who brought you back from the past. I'm surprised I didn't see through her. She, he..." Race was uncertain which pronoun was correct. "She exuded an aura of trust. It made it hard to believe that she was any more than who she claimed she was. Quinagoth saw through her, though. I can't help wondering if Libna arranged a small incident during the battle to remove her." Nothing much had changed since they'd last been in this small chamber. The bodies remained where they had fallen, and the table was still covered in quite a lavish spread. "The next passage is in darkness," Anita said. "We need to find a torch or a lantern of some kind before we press on." "I'd grab a torch from one of the sconces, but it looks as if they're nearly burnt out," Race commented. "Oh," Jenny said, "let's not worry about that. I'll provide the light." She began to cast a spell. It was one of the easiest spells in her repertoire, a light spell. Nothing happened. Race asked, unable to resist the urge to tilt his head slightly. "Jenny, what are you doing?" Jenny grinned sheepishly. "It's been less than 10 minutes since the dragons passed through the gate and left this world behind. I'd already forgotten they took my magic with them. I guess we'd better find a lantern or a torch after all." They found a pair of lanterns in short order, and they also found a stock of torches, no doubt to replace the ones that are currently burning in their sconces in that small room. Anita lit both of the lanterns and handed one to Jenny, keeping the other for herself. As she did so, Race found himself attracted again towards the stinking passage. "I really think we should find out where this leads." "It's probably their laboratory," Jenny commented. "Like I said." "That's just it," Race replied. "I don't think so. I spent nearly half a year in Goldspawn surrounded by Harpies. I know what Harpy urine smells like, and trust me, this isn't it." "What do you think it does smell like?" Jenny asked. "It's more like rotting meat," Race replied as he remembered the crow's cages that had lined their way into the elven city. "So they dumped their leftovers in there?" Jenny explained. "No," Race replied. "It's too strong for that, and, Jenny pressed, "we're missing around 800,000 human slaves. What do elves do when they no longer lead their slaves?" "No," Jenny replied. "It doesn't bear thinking about." "If he's right," Anita put in, "I don't want to know. Let's just get out of here." "But," Race began to protest. "Anita's right. This is too big for us." "I'll send someone to check it out," Jenny promised him. "If they are the missing slaves, they should be retrieved and buried properly. There should be a priest with the team that recovers them." Race hesitated. He was tempted to grab a torch and check for himself, but it had been a long and tiring day, and he was eager to see his wife again. They continued into the passage that would take them back to the surface, and again they had to rely on what little light the two lanterns would afford them. At first their attitudes were a little bit more subdued, but before they were halfway along that dark passage, they began to chat again. "What do you think Devon Hate was thinking when he started pleading for our help?" Jenny asked. "I mean, did he really think we could stand against the power of a dragon?" "Desperate, I guess," Race replied. He shrugged his shoulders. Jenny nodded. "It was pitiful to watch a creature as powerful as that reduced to begging." Anita laughed. "It was." She addressed her next comment to Race. "When he offered you immortality, I'll bet you were seriously tempted." "I didn't give it a moment's thought," Race replied. "Honestly." "Oh, come on," Anita said disbelievingly. "No, seriously," Race told her. They were about halfway along the passage when Race heard movement coming from somewhere up ahead. There was no sign of anyone in the passage heading towards them. There was no other source of light in the passage other than their own. "I think someone is waiting for us in the large cave," Race informed the others. "I guess my husband sent some men to find us," Jenny replied. "We should go and greet them," Anita suggested. There were more than 20 soldiers in that cave. They were checking out the passages that encircled the cave, evidently trying to decide which one they should follow first. As soon as Jenny, Race and Anita re-entered the cave, the soldiers stopped what they were doing and hurried over to greet their queen. "The king sent us to check that you were all right and to give you any aid you might need," one of them said. Jenny turned and gave Race a knowing smile. "Careful," another commented. "There's a harpy with them." "Must be a friendly," a third voice suggested. "I can't see the queen letting one of the bad ones travel with her." Idiots. This was said from a voice that Reyes recognised. This is Sir Reyes the Moth, Knight of the Realm and adopted brother to Her Majesty. You will show him the proper respect. The soldiers mumbled between themselves, but they seemed a lot less on their guard now that Reyes had been named. Now that he felt it was safe to move, Reyes approached the officer who had named him and offered his hand in greeting. Captain Grimm, it's good to see you alive and well. I'm glad you made it. A lot of good men didn't, sir, Captain Grimm replied. You should take your sister and head on out of the caves. The king will want to know that his wife is safe. Yes, of course, Reyes agreed. Are you coming? I'd like to buy you a drink and maybe we can discuss old times. Not yet, Captain Grimm replied. We need to check these caves out and make sure that no enemy has taken refuge here. The scene when they got outside the caves was one of desolation rather than destruction. There was still a lot of people around, but in comparison to how full the pit had been when they had entered the caves, the place seemed to be empty. There were soldiers who were standing guard at the mouth of the cave who greeted their queen with a cheer when she emerged. They didn't really give Reyes or Anita a second look. Nearby, Reyes saw the remnants of Rave's raiders gathered together in one small area awaiting their fate. There were no longer any elves, goblins or harpies among their ranks. Those who were left were very few in number. The raiders had been disarmed and were being guarded by a selection of men-at-arms. One of the raiders, a Minotaur officer, stepped forward as far as the guards would let him and called across the pit to Reyes. It was Gress. Tangrag, I guess they got you too. I'm glad you survived. Reyes glanced briefly at the Minotaur and offered him a tight-lipped smile, and then he continued, following his sister as they proceeded through the pit. The king was waiting at the top of the pit with his remaining few knights gathered around him. Duke Manipul Ganespa was one of those who had survived. I want to thank you for saving my wife's life, Reyes said to the knight. Ganespa replied gruffly. He then turned away from Reyes and disappeared behind some of the other knights. Reyes glanced around the remaining knights, trying to see if there was any sign of Tamitha. He hoped the young duchess was all right, but he couldn't see her. The king was clearly overjoyed to see his wife safe and sound. The two of them embraced for what seemed to be several minutes. Oh, your poor hand, Jenny said. It's nothing that can't be fixed, the king said gently. Where's Mangloss? Jenny shook her head sadly. He didn't make it. Then I'm afraid it's up to you and Reyes, the king commented. You both have spells that can heal and regenerate limbs, don't you? We have a lot of wounded, and some of them will never see another day if you don't help them. I'm sorry, Jenny said. I no longer have the ability to use magic, not as Reyes. Could you not try? The king asked. It might be worth a try, Reyes agreed. The dragon said you might be able to cast spells using the magic stored in certain magical items. Dragon? The king said, confused. I'll tell you all about it later, Jenny replied. The king nodded his head uncertainly, and then he addressed Reyes. Reyes, we need your ring. No, Jenny commented. That ring has too much potential value. I will use my ring. I don't think I'm going to need to defend myself from unwanted enchantments any longer. Reyes summoned the staff from his hammerstone and handed it to Jenny. Use this. It might help. Jenny took the staff and rested it lightly against her husband's arm. Then she removed the ring from her finger and placed it gently in the palm of her hand. I wish I knew if I was doing this right. She didn't exactly explain how to do it. Who? The king asked, confused. The dragon, Jenny explained. Now, hush. Let me concentrate. She began to cast a spell, trying to will the magic stored in the ring through the staff and at the same time trying to mould it into the shape of a regenerate spell. Reyes watched carefully, but he couldn't tell if anything was happening or not. His ability to see the flow of magic had been taken from him. Nothing happened. It's no good, Jenny said after a few seconds. She seemed quite tired from the strain of trying. It's just not working. I'll have to try a few experiments and try and find a way to release the power. The king looked a little distressed. Well, we have a few doctors, but there are many wounds they just won't be able to heal. Reyes didn't hear a lot of what passed between Jenny and the king after the king's last comment. Gaggara had approached him quietly from behind, and now she threw her arms around him, crushing his wings gently in her embrace. Reyes turned towards his wife and took her lovingly in his arms. The two of them held each other tightly and kissed for at least a minute or two. In the end, Reyes only broke free because he began to suspect that he and Gaggara were becoming quite the spectacle. I was so worried about you, handsome, Gaggara commented. She leaned in to kiss him again. I was worried about you too, Reyes replied. He looked over her shoulder at the hole in her wing where she had been struck by an arrow. Oh, you poor wing. It'll heal, Gaggara assured him. It's a minor wound. I will fly again. Good, Reyes commented. You know, the owner of a familiar voice said, there was a time when an injury like that would have been enough to have her killed. Harpies don't usually carry passengers. Then you came along, Chief. You've changed the way a lot of us think, at least in our village. Reyes turned to face the speaker. It was one of his two missing bodyguards. She was holding a child in her hand. Samigi, he greeted. I thought you were dead. What happened to you during the battle? See for yourself, Sir Mickey replied. I think the excitement of the battle induced labour. I was forced to land and have my child. Fortunately, a huntress from one of our allied villages saw what was happening and came to my aid. I'm afraid I missed most of the battle. Do you know what happened to Quinagoff? Reyes asked. I haven't seen her since the battle began, Sir Mickey replied. Reyes glanced at Gaggara and then back at Sir Mickey. It's good to see you. I'd like to know how many of our village are still alive. Would you go and conduct a quick head count for me? You'd like to be alone with the leader, Sir Mickey commented. Reyes nodded. I'm sorry. It's good to see you, but I miss my wife so much. We'll chat later. I get the hint, Sir Mickey replied. Maybe I'll find Quinagoff alive somewhere in all this. Reyes turned his attention back to Gaggara. I hated to send her away like that. He put his arms around his wife. Now, where were we? Gaggara kissed him gently and then reached forward a little to nibble on one of his ears. Did you know Skeeg the Ogre is among our prisoners? Skeeg the Ogre, Reyes commented. The name felt familiar in some way, but Reyes couldn't put a face to it. You remember Skeeg? Gaggara commented, holding him seductively tight. She was always my favourite to watch in the arena. I missed her last fight. Well, anyway, she's down in the pit with the other prisoners. I hope the king doesn't just kill her out of hand. Reyes, it was the king's voice calling for his attention again. Reyes, could you put that girl down for a moment? Jenny and I would like to talk to you. Reyes looked at Gaggara again, and then put his arm lovingly around her and turned to face the king. Yes, my liege? We seem to have won the battle, the king said. I'm still not too clear on what happened, but the elves have vanished. Our remaining foes have either surrendered or scattered. I believe most of what has come to pass is thanks in no small way to you. Actually, it was Jenny's wish that won us the day, Reyes replied. The king didn't ask Reyes to elucidate on what he meant by that. Instead he said, I don't have a lot to reward you with, but after the massacre at my wedding feast, we are short quite a few dukes, with your brother Greyforth also among the dead. I was wondering if you'd be willing to take on the mantle of dukedom off. Reyes looked at the king for a moment, uncertain that the monarch was even being serious. Then he looked upwards towards the sky and finally back at the king before saying, I don't think so. Although I appreciate the honour you offer me, Kell, Greyforth's son, still lives. It is he who is next in line to hold the title of the dukedom. I will not stand in his way. I understand, the king acceded. What if I was to give you the dukedom of this island instead? There has been no sign of the young duke or his sister since we arrived. I'm afraid that something bad must have happened to them. Since I plan to hand the island to your race anyway, maybe you'd make an ideal duke. It would be good to have someone like you liaison between ourselves and the Harpy population. Again I must decline, Reyes said calmly. Harpies are not going to understand the role I play. I would have to make myself visible for my subjects, but these are Harpies. They won't see themselves as my subjects. They'll see me as another male who might be a threat to their own males. You'd be seeking a new duke within the year. I'm afraid he's right, dear, Jenny commented. The king nodded slowly. Well, there are plenty of other dukedoms that currently have no duke, and plenty of people better suited to the role, Reyes replied. Humans are never going to accept a harpy for a duke, no matter what I may have done for them. Besides, my father was the Duke of Damoth. I remember how much work he had to do just to keep his dukedom ticking over. I'm not sure I want a life like that. I have to give you something, the king said. You really don't, Reyes replied. All I want is to be allowed to return to my home at Castle Damoth. I'll take the survivors of my village there, and we can settle down in the vicinity and live out our days in peace and relative tranquillity. Agreed, the king said. Perhaps you could act as advisor for Duke Kell, at least until he's old enough to run things for himself, Jenny suggested. Perhaps, Reyes agreed. There was a short pause. Then the king said, Look, Reyes, when Jenny and I got married, you were in Goldspawn. That was because my father had put a price on your head. You were missed greatly at the wedding. Perhaps it's just as well you weren't there, though, considering what happened. I remember, Reyes said. Well, the king explained, in order to show the people that the country is truly back in human hands, Jenny and I have decided to go through the entire ceremony again. I think we'd be delighted if you and Gaggara would attend. We can do better than that, dear, Jenny suggested. Let's make it a double wedding, Reyes, Gaggara. When you were married, it was in a small outside ceremony, a kind of make-do with what we had affair. Wouldn't you prefer to announce your love for each other in the surroundings of the great temple of First Town? We need to retake the place first, Reyes commented. Devon Hay pretty much made it clear that the elves and goblins had gone from Floreth, but there were still likely to be harpies in the sky. Harpies who may not even know their elven allies are gone. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Jenny replied. Will you join us in a double wedding? Make the ceremony a symbol of our new land. A display case for humans and harpies to live together in harmony with each other. Reyes glanced at Gaggara. What do you think? Gaggara smiled and said, I'd be delighted. It would be nice to give you a proper wedding night. Jenny blushed. The king smiled, and then he deftly changed the subject. Are you sure I can't talk you into taking a dukedom? Reyes tilted his head to the side. We've been through this. I would be unsuitable as a duke. The king nodded. Well, there is something else I can do for you. This time I won't take no for an answer. Oh? Reyes asked. He had this strange feeling that someone else was also trying to talk to him. He looked around but couldn't see who it might be. What might that be? I'm going to adopt you into the royal family, not as my son, but as my brother. Henceforth, you will be known as Prince Reyes Borton, or the Moff Borton if you prefer. Now, this is just an honorary title. You will never be allowed to take the throne should anything happen to me before I have an heir. Nor can you pass the title on to your offspring. What it does mean is that you and your wife will be allowed to come and go about the palace as often as you wish. There will probably be other privileges that go with the title, Jenny told him, but I'm sure we can work them out later. Have you two been planning this? Reyes asked. There it was again, a strange nudge in his mind that someone, not actually there, was trying to contact him. I suggested it last night, Jenny confessed. Before the battle was even fought, Reyes commented. I knew you'd never accept a dukedom, Jenny admitted. I also knew that my husband wouldn't be happy if he didn't reward you with something. Once again there was the strange feeling in Reyes' mind that someone was trying to talk to him. Did either of you two notice that? Reyes asked. What? Jenny commented. It feels as if someone is nagging me to talk to them, Reyes commented. Like I've forgotten something. Could it be your scrying ball? Jenny asked. Reyes blinked. After all the events of the day, it hadn't occurred to him that there was anyone he knew that wasn't at the battle that might want to talk to him. He brought the scrying ball out of the hammerstone ring and held it in the palm of his hand. Hello? Unintentionally he spoke out loud. Hello, came the reply. Oh, Reyes, I'm glad you answered. I was about to give up. This is Barden calling. I'm currently in a small village just outside the capital of Dubra. It's Sir Richman, Reyes revealed to the royals. I tried contacting both Mangloss and the Duke, but neither of them is answering, Sir Richman told him. I was hoping you could pass on my message. Both Mangloss and Greyfall are dead, Reyes replied sadly. Oh, Sir Richman replied. I'm sorry. I have the King and Queen with me, though. Would you like me to hand you over to one of them? Reyes asked. No, Sir Richman replied. Just pass on my message. Tell them that I'm not sure what's going on here, but after hiding in the busy streets of the capital city of Dubra for the last few months, I was mingling as best I could with a crowd of busy shoppers when suddenly every one of them vanished. The place is deserted. Oh, there are still slaves in the streets, slaves with haunted looks on their faces as if they're waiting for orders. But the elves are all gone. I don't mind admitting I was scared. I fled from the city as fast as my legs would carry me. I made my way to the village of Kor, just outside Dubra city. It too is deserted. It's eerie, I don't mind telling you. Reyes conveyed the message to the King and Queen. Jenny suddenly looked very stricken. That wasn't my intent at all. She put her hands over her face as if she couldn't bring herself to face the world. Oh gods, no, what have I done? Why? The King asked. What have you done? You saved humanity, Reyes told her. You won the war. Removing the elves from Flora and making the land safe from future attack was my intent, Jenny cried. I didn't mean to commit genocide. Flora is safe from elven attack, Reyes pointed out. He decided to remain tactfully silent about the fact that the land of the 1,000 tribes was now likely to be just as empty. Jealousy and strife hadn't known what Jenny had meant by this land, so she had removed all elven and goblin life from the world. What have I done? Jenny continued. All those people, all those children. She sniffled loudly. I'm sorry, Reyes told her, but you didn't have a lot of time to think about how you were going to word the wish. Life must go on, sweetheart, the King commented. What happened is an unfortunate consequence of war. It's not your fault. Then whose fault is it? Jenny barked back, tears running down her cheeks. Death and hate, Reyes told her flatly. Jenny looked at Reyes. She sniffled and then nodded. It would be easy to blame everything on the dragon, but in the end it was my wish that did it.